two-dimensional Merkaba star, the full two-dimensional Merkaba star, and scale it down so that it fits in the center, there's a scaling by a factor of 2. Also, if we take Katara grids and nest Katara grids within each other, they will scale by a factor of 2. So this scaling by a factor of 2, it has a connection to the scaling factor for the crystal spiral. Now, if we look at the three-dimensional correspondence, what happens there? If we take, we say, the three-dimensional Merkaba spiral, it's represented by a three-sided pyramid here, and we put a sphere around it. If we put a sphere within that to contain an inner Merkaba spiral, what's the size relationship between them in 3 dimensions? It turns out that in 3 dimensions, the size relationship, the nesting, the scaling is by a factor of 3. So I would have to reduce this structure threefold to fit it within itself, and reduce it threefold again to fit it within, to further embed it. So what we have here is a very interesting pattern. We have two-dimensional structures scale by a factor of 2, 3-dimensional structures scale and nest by a factor of 3. Now, two-dimensional structures are a lot of our structures in our Christiac structures are actually two-dimensional in nature. For example, the Katara grid, the Ruche shields, and so on. And if we think about it, an awful lot of the information that we process about the world is two-dimensional in nature. For example, we're looking at a pattern here that is two-dimensional in nature. We haven't progressed to 3D yet. So when we look at information on a page, it's 2D. When we look at information, look at an image on a television screen, it's 2D. So an awful lot, and when we look at maps, it's 2D. When you look at photographs, they're 2D. So an awful lot of the information that we have about the world is 2D in nature, and it's governed by this expansion process. Now, our interaction with the world, however, is in 3D, and this is where the expansion by a factor of 3 becomes significant. So we begin to see this emerging now in the Merkaba spiral structure. Now, if we take the Merkaba spin speeds, when we plot them on, Ash uses these calendar diagrams quite a bit. In other words, what we expand out by one complete circle. When we complete a circle, we move out to the next circle, complete that, and then move out another circle. So if we take the spin speeds that we saw on the previous diagram, if we plot them on this diagram, on this calendar type diagram, which has been using quite a bit, we see a very distinct pattern emerging. Now, the particle are the transharmonic Merkaba spin speeds corresponding to 45, 405, and I think it's 36, 45. If we take the x-axis as the base or the reference, the 0 point, we see that all of the transharmonic Merkaba spin speeds, they lie along a vertical line, along this vertical line. If we take the magnetic components, they all lie, we say we start at 11 2/3, it lies on this 11 2/3 line. The next speed up lies on a quadrant line from that. It lies on a line that's 90 degrees forward from that. And if I go on to the next spin speed, 911 2/3, again, it lies on one of these quadrant lines, and the next quadrant line in sequence. So what we see emerging here is that the Merkaba spin speeds lie on a set of quadrant lines, and it progresses along these quadrant lines from one to the next. So the Merkaba spin speed starts here, goes on to the next quadrant line, goes on to the next quadrant line, and the next stage of expansion would be out here. Something similar happens with the on the electrical side. We start on the yellow line. We have 4 quadrant lines based from that. We start at one of them, and we expand in the opposite direction from one quadrant line to the next. So these Merkaba spin speeds are incredibly precise. There's a very detailed pattern and there's a lot of structure in them. It's incredibly intricate structure. And what's absolutely amazing is the precision of the numbers. The numbers, they look a little bit strange, you know, with our fractions and so on. But if you look closely at them, there's incredible depth and structure in those numbers. And so what we're beginning to see is the level of depth in these numbers. Now, if we take these lines have relationship to the 15-degree lines that we saw in the previous, in an earlier diagram. So, for example, all of the magnetic lines are close to 15-degree lines, but they're 3 1/3 back from them. And likewise, all of the electrical lines are forward from a 15-degree line, or sorry, in this case, it's 30 degrees. If we take the 30-degree line, which is 2 15s, and add 3 1/3, we get the electrical lines. So now the direction of this pattern in the magnetic direction is clockwise, whereas the actual spin speed within the Merkaba spirals themselves is counterclockwise for magnetic and clockwise for electrical. So the pattern, the orientation of the pattern is a bit different to the actual rotation directions of the Merkaba spin speeds themselves. So what we're beginning to see here is the emergence of a pattern similar to the construction of the Rosetta code. The Rosetta code is constructed from 2 spirals, crystal spirals emerging in opposite polarity, the Ettore polarity on spinning clockwise, the Adore polarity spinning counterclockwise, and then the whole pattern coming up into alignment on the vertical axis. So we see a similar pattern emerging in the Merkaba spin speeds as we have in the construction of the Rosetta code. Now, if we look more closely at the numbers, we can align the numbers in this clock formation. We can take the electrical 33 1/3, the magnetic 11 2/3, and they form in polar alignment. Together, they add to give us the Particai unit, the 45 spin speed Particai unit, and then the difference between them gives us the differential field, which determines what sits in the core of the Merkaba spiral. So they can be aligned in this arrangement. Now, if we look a little bit more closely at the numbers, we see 2 patterns emerging. We have the 5, the 3 1/3, the 1 2/3, 1 2/3. If we take that pattern aside for the moment and look at the remaining numbers, we see that the remaining numbers form a very clear pattern. They go 10, 20, 30, 40. So the remaining numbers form a very exact pattern that is in clock alignment. So if we think of the original clock, we have 3, 6, 9, 12. The proportions between them are 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, within this pattern, we can see that the electrical is 3 times the magnetic. So here we begin to see the emergence of the relationship between the electrical and the magnetic. It goes back to the clock pattern, which goes back to the Rouchet symbol, and the relation between the electrical and the magnetic within that Rouchet pattern. Now, what we have over here with the 5, the 3 1/3, and the 1 2/3, this forms a very interesting pattern in its own right. It represents a seed sequence. Now, the numbers, the fractions may look a little bit unusual, but there is a significance to them. Now, again, this represents a seed pattern. These elements go back, the 3 1/3, for example, goes back to, if we go back to the original Particai phasing process, we come to, we say, a num flame within the original Particai phasing process that has this 3 1/3 quantum number. So these numbers go back into the original Particai phasing process and have significance there. So there is connection all the way back. However, here in the main part of the number has the electrical component 3 times the magnetic component. However, in the seed pattern, it's only twice. So the 3 1/3 is only twice the magnetic component in the seed pattern. So that represents a slight complication, as it were, but we can see the significance of that later. Now, if we take these number patterns, combine them for the different levels of Merkaba spin speed progression, we can see the pattern emerging. So we can see, starting out with the base pattern here, we have the 45, 33 1/3 electrical, 11 2/3 magnetic, the differential field, 21 2/3. Now, within this pattern, the electrical spin speed is roughly is 3 times the magnetic spin speed. Not exactly 3 times, it's 3 times minus this 1 2/3. So we have a threefold expansion or threefold development in going from the magnetic to the electrical. Now, when we go up to the next level, again, we multiply by 3. From 33 1/3 up to 101 2/3, we have a multiplication by 3, but we get back the seed pattern. So here, the magnetic to the electrical multiplies by 3, but returns a seed element of 1 2/3, and the seed element here we multiply by 3 again, and the seed element comes back. So we have progressive multiplication by 3. We go multiply by 3 to go from the magnetic to the electrical at this level, multiply by 3 again to go up to the magnetic at the next level, multiply by 3, between the magnetic and the electrical, and so on up through the pattern. Now, if we look at the, excuse me, if we look at the, the transharmonic Merkaba numbers, they multiply by 9. They combine the two trees. They multiply by 9 exactly up through the pattern. Now, if we extend this pattern downwards, we end up with the seed pattern from the previous diagram. Divide this by 9, we get the 5, and reverse this 11 2/3, we get 3 1/3, and reverse the 3 1/3, we get the 1 2/3. So the seed pattern feeds into this sequence, and the sequence expands upwards in this way. Now, if we look at the look a little bit more closely at that configuration, we can see a number of interesting things. First of all, we have the two polarities, the part decay, the part decom, the electrical and the magnetic polarities. We have the part decay level from which they both emerge, represented by the 45 spin speed, for example. Now, if we take those three in relationship to each other, we can see that they represent the part decay phasing process. So we have the part decay unit here, polarizing, creating part decay and part decom units. These expanding in 90-degree orientation in relation to the part decay unit. Now, if we look at the part decay and the part decom solely in relation to each other, forget about the part decay unit for the moment. Now, in this configuration, we see that the part decay and the part decom polarities, they form in 180-degree polarity opposition to each other. So this is where we see the significance of the alignment of the Merkaba spirals. We see when the two polarities in relation to the part decay unit, they're in 90-degree alignment, but directly in relation to each other, they're in opposition. They're in 180-degree opposition to each other. Now, this is reflected in the fact that we say the electrical spiral is pointing upwards, the magnetic spiral is pointing downwards in 180-degree opposition. Furthermore, we have, we'll say the spin speeds, or sorry, the fins, like Ash discusses the fin alignments. In other words, the point of the Merkaba spiral. For males, the fin for the upper electrical Merkaba spiral points out, the magnetic one points backwards. So the fins of the Merkaba spirals are in opposition also. So that's reflected in this, this alignment. Now, this part decay, part decom polarity, or it represents a polarity. And that polarity, the opposition of the two elements in the polarity, it sets up the oscillation that we've seen previously. And so this is where we get the oscillation. We have the energy coming in here. We have the oscillation occurring at this level here. Now, the interaction between the part decay and the part decom, they create differential field at the core of the Merkaba, but they also create what comes into manifestation. So what comes into physical manifestation is determined by the interaction between these two electrical and magnetic polarities. Now, we can see this pattern repeated also if we consider the Avius and Avius bodies. Here we have the Avius hydrogel endoplasmic body that we're using in the recent techniques. At this level here, we have the electrothermogel oscillatory body. And at this level here, we have the atomic body. So we can see the same pattern repeating at different levels within the teaching. Now, this this pattern, if we take the part decay and the part decom, we can consider that we can take it is the core of the Rouchet pattern. And if we project this polarity out in this direction, and this polarity out in this direction, as we have here, what we have then is the basis of the Rouchet. We have the 4 central quadrant points, and then we have the octant points emerging on the out as these polarities project outwards. So we have formation of the Rouchet. Now, the key points to take from this particular diagram is the opposition between the electrical and the magnetic polarities. Their natural orientation is in opposition to each other. And there is a natural numerical alignment corresponding to the positions in the Rouchet pattern. There's a natural numerical relationship between the part decay and the part decom, between the electrical and the magnetic, of 3 to 1. Now, this leads us on to what's referred to here as the Merkaba spiral. If we plot the Merkaba spin speeds in spiral form, in a completely geometrical spiral, we do get a spiral. So we start out at 11 2/3 magnetic, multiply by 3 to get 33 1/3, and electrical, and then move up to 101 2/3 magnetic, then up to 303 1/3 electrical, 911 2/3 magnetic, and so on. So the stages of expansion are by 3. So from magnetic to electrical is by 3, and so on. Not exactly 3, but 3 and giving a seed, and 3 and returning a seed. So because we have polarities involved, we have a seed exchange going on. So which complicates the spiral a little bit. Now, so what we have here now is the crystallic Merkaba spin speeds. They do have a spiral structure similar in principle to the crystal spiral, but different in detail. It's not based on the number 2, it's based on the number 3 and its associated number sequence. So instead of going up 1 2 4 8, it goes up 1 3 9 27. So there is that difference. And we saw there earlier the significance of the 2, the scaling by 2 and the scaling by 3. The scaling by 2 is characteristic of 2-dimensional structures. The scaling by 3 is characteristic of 3-dimensional structures. What we're dealing with here, we're dealing with Merkaba. Merkaba is fundamentally 3-dimensional in nature, and it naturally scales by a factor of 3. So this is where we see the spiral structure, excuse me, the spiral structure of the Merkaba spiral expanding on the basis of 3 rather than 2. Now, The structure is a little bit more complex than the crystal spiral because it involves polarities. It involves the part K and the part K polarities, and being polar, they exchange a seed between each other. So just as you have the two polarities, they're exchanging a seed, and that seed is creating the next stage of expansion. So this seed, so we have the seed exchange going on between the part K and the part K polarities, and this could be regarded either as an exchange of seed, or it could be regarded as a backflow return to source and a subsequent return outflow from source. So this spiral is faster and stronger than the crystal spiral. It's expanding much more rapidly. It's expanding on the basis of by 3 instead of by 2. And both of them are considerably faster than the golden mean and the Fibonacci spirals. So in terms of strength, we have this Merkaba spiral, we have the crystal spiral, and then we have the golden mean spiral, and we have the Fibonacci spiral. So the expansion, the Merkaba expansion of the Metatronic Merkaba is on the Fibonacci spiral, the weakest, and the Merkaba expansion of the crystal Merkaba structures is on this Merkaba spiral, which is the strongest. So they represent two extremities in terms of strength. Now, we come now to just take a quick look at the structure of Metatronic Merkaba. Now, in the Metatronic Merkaba, again, we have the two spirals. We have the upper and the lower spiral forming a spiral pair. We have two tetrahedra interwoven to create a spiral pair. Now, we have 3 sets of those spiral pairs. Now, a critical difference in the Metatronic spiral is that the upper spiral and the lower spiral are locked together. They're phase locked, and they spin in the same direction at the same speed. Now, we've seen in the Merkaba structures that the natural orientation of the magnetic and the electrical spirals is in opposition to each other, that they spin in opposite directions, and that there is a 3-to-1 natural balance in spin speed between the two. So what we have here now is a distortion whereby the two spirals are locked together so that they spin in the same direction and they spin at the same speed. Now, we have 3 of these spiral pairs. We have an inner spiral pair that's associated with the body, and that's locked in position. It doesn't rotate within the Metatronic system. We have the next level, the next pair of spirals. They correspond to what's described as the electrical male mind component of embodiment. And then we have an outer pair of spirals that correspond to the female magnetic emotional nature. Now, it's interesting, like these spiral pairs would roughly correspond to dimensions 1, 2, and 3. But it's interesting to see that the sequence of 2 and 3 is reversed. It would be normal to have the 3 on the outside and the 2 in the middle. So we have a reversal of we have a reversal of the D2 and the D3 Merkaba pairs. Furthermore, the electrical, what's described as the electrical pair of spirals corresponding to the male mind component, that is spun in a counterclockwise direction, and the emotional female pair is spun in a clockwise direction. And the ratio of the spin speeds in the basic stage, it corresponds to 34 counterclockwise for the electrical mind component and 21 clockwise for the female emotional component. Now, there's a stage development of the spin speeds. The 2 outer spirals, the inner one corresponding to the body is locked in position, doesn't move. The 2 outer ones, the 2 outer pairs rotate in opposite directions. So the upper and the lower halves are locked together, spinning in the same direction, but the outer pair the emotional and the mental pairs, they spin in opposite directions, they counter-rotate. So they're started spinning at equal speed. In other words, the two outer pairs of spirals, they're sent spinning in opposite directions at equal speed up to 1/3 of the speed of light. They're then set spinning at a ratio of 34 to 21, the electrical at 34 counterclockwise, the magnetic at 21 clockwise, and they're spun in that ratio up to 2/3 the speed of light. They're next spun up to 9/10 the speed of light, and in the final stage, they're spun up to a superluminal speed. That means they go beyond the speed of light. So what that effectively means is that they're catapulted out of this space-time. Once you go beyond the speed of light, you go beyond this space. You're effectively catapulted out of this space-time, and it enters what is referred to as the fourth dimension. So this is where we get the 55 acceleration. If you think of the 34 and the 21, they're going in opposite directions. 34 that way, 21 that way. The difference between the two is 55. So when this is spun up to the superluminal speed, this 55 acceleration kicks in, and it corresponds to a catapulting into the what's referred to as a fourth dimension, but effectively it is a catapulting into this toral rift, into the wormhole connections, and into that whole construct. Now, if we look at the energy flows within the Merkaba spiral, as I mentioned before, a key feature of crystal structure is that all the structures are interconnect across all the levels of cosmic structure. So the structures from one level interconnect with those from the next level up, and so on. So there's open connection, and there's energy can flow freely through the structure. Furthermore, all of the structures have a direct connection to the source through the center point. Now, if we look at the circulation of energy within the crystal Merkaba structure, the Christiac Merkaba structure, we have a pattern of energy distribution. First of all, the Christic Merkaba structure spans all of the dimensional levels. On the previous diagram, the only Merkaba levels that they work with are the dimensions 1, 2, and 3 ones. There's no reference to higher dimensional levels. So what we have here is the full dimension Merkaba structure across all 12 dimensions of the our local cosmic structure. And we have a circulation of energy. So the Christic structures are multidimensional, they're multi-level, and all the levels are open to each other, allowing a free flow between the levels. So we have a full multidimensional circulation of energy through all dimensions of the Merkaba structure. So we have the 12 dimensions of the Merkaba, of the local structure, represented by the Katara grid, and then we have the primal light and the primal sound fields on the periphery. So we have a circulation of energy that comes in from the higher dimensional level through the 14th center, circulates down to this lock point between dimensions 11 and 12, and comes in this way, circulates in a clockwise direction through the core, and through the centers, the dimensional centers, and it interacts with the open doorway to source in the center and draws energy in and out to the structure, draws energy into the structure, and releases energy out from the structure through the open doorway in the center. So we have a multi-dimensional flow of energy that spans all levels of the structure. Likewise, we have, on the magnetic side, again, we have an inflow of energy in a counterclockwise direction from the, we'd say the primal light and sound fields, through into the dimensional structure, the 12-dimensional structure, and circulates in a counterclockwise direction through the dimensional levels of that structure, interacting with the center, with the doorway in the center. And this allows for a free flow of energy, multidimensional energy, through the Merkabic structure. Now, if we go to the corresponding structure on the Metatronic side, we come up with the yin-yang structure. This is referred to as the Ayan-Yone flow, the pattern by which energy is circulated within the Merkaba structure. Now, if we look at the corresponding structure on the Metatronic side, we have a yin-yang energy distribution. Now, looking at this structure, we can see that the structure is closed. It's closed to interdimensional energy flows. There's no connection to higher levels. It's closed to interdimensional energy flows. We can see that both polarities are basically rotating in the same direction. The two polarities are represented by the black and the white. They're basically rotating in the same direction. This reduces the possibility for interaction between them. The crystalline structures counter-rotate and set up an interaction between them. Here we have them rotating in the same direction, and this corresponds to the upper and the lower spirals of the Merkaba spinning in the same direction. They're phase-locked to spin in the same direction. This is reflected in the yin-yang structure, energy structure. So both polarities rotate in the same direction, reducing the degree of interaction between them. Furthermore, the polarity centers are off-center. This is the center for the white, this is the center for the black. They're off-center. Just as we say in the, when we were looking at the golden mean spiral and the Fibonacci spiral, the centers were off-center. Now, what are the consequences of this? So we have the phase-locked counter-rotating spirals with same spin speed. They sever higher dimensional connections. So the connections are broken off to the higher dimensional levels. So what we end up then, what ensues from that then is a closed universe. We don't have the open connections to the higher levels that would normally arise in a crystalline universe. Now, because these, the open flows, or the flows are blocked, the circulation of energy within these structures closes back on itself. Instead of having an open inflow and an outflow and an interaction with the center, these energy patterns, they close back on themselves. So they, instead of having the more multidimensional pattern for the A-Yan Yuan-A flow, we get the more closed patterns of the, we get these tube torus field patterns, which are basically energy distributions that close back on themselves. And they effectively lock energy within the closed cycle. They don't allow multidimensional energy flow in or out, and they don't interact with the center to allow energy to return, backflow, return, and outflow from source through the center. Now, because the top electrical and the bottom magnetic spirals are spinning in the same direction at the same speed, we have an imbalance. The natural relationship between the electrical and the magnetic components of the spirals is 3:1. When they spin at the same speed, the magnetic component is 3 times too strong. This excessive magnetic influence causes excessive densification, too much density. It lowers the frequency. We've seen how the balance between electrical and magnetic influence is frequency. It lowers the frequency. It lowers the light speed. You remember earlier we said that light speed was 3 times too low. It's 3 times too low because the magnetic influence is 3 times too strong. This is where it comes from. So this distortion of the magnetic and the electrical influence, or the balance between electrical and magnetic influences, it leads to distortions of frequency, density. It also leads to distortions of space and time. It leads to space and time distortions. Yeah?
So it would slow time down.
Yeah.
We got the artificial time acceleration. So how is that good?
Sorry, I didn't get all your question.
It seems like with this distortion, it's slowing time.
Yeah.
But then we have the artificial time acceleration.
Yeah. Yeah, we have our local universal structure, and our local universal structure is trapped in this configuration and is conditioned by it. Now, within that local universe, there are still natural rhythms, and those natural rhythms are further interfered with. So, for example, we'd say the Earth spins around the Sun, a certain spin speed such that there are 365 days in a year. Now, that isn't necessarily the natural spin speed for the Earth orbiting the Sun. We have we have the large distortions that condition our local universe and that we are bound in by. But within that, again, you have further distortions. And so you have distortions within distortions. So you can have the whole universe excessively densified and having the speed of light slow down by a factor of 3. But within that, then you can have further distortions where it's locally speeded up. So it's a case of distortion within distortion within distortion. Some of them working in the same, some of them working to speed up things, some of them working to slow down things. So I hope that makes some, maybe not answer your question, but we yeah. Actually, we're running fairly tight on time, so we can talk a little bit more about that individually. But the questions are very interesting, and if we have an opportunity, we can go into it in a little bit more detail. But we do have just a few more things, and we are running a little bit. Actually, we've run over time. I'm sorry. So I'll just press on and finish quickly. So the lack of in-feed from the center or from source and from higher dimensions leads to a dying universe. And so first of all, we have a closed universe, cut off from connections, from multidimensional connections. Within that, then, we have a lot of energy trapped, and the energy cannot flow naturally to and from source. So it leads to a dying universe. And so this is the context in which we can talk of the Metatronic death sciences. They've isolated the universe, severed the connections, the energy is trapped, and the energy is decaying, leading to a dying universe. The universe isn't able to replenish itself. Now, the Fibonacci ratios, they facilitate energy feeding. The energy, where energy can be taken, is a process whereby energy can be taken from another structure, trapped, drawn from the other structure, and ingested into what is attempting to feed off the energy. Okay, so we're nearly finished. You'll be glad to hear. Just one other topic to touch on. There's a lot of material out there in the sacred geometry, the sacred geometry scene. There's a huge focus on the golden mean spiral and the golden mean ratio in this material. Now, if we look a little bit closely at a lot of the material out there, a lot of what are claimed to be geometrical alignments and numerical relationships are actually, when you look at them closely, they're actually very approximate. And you could read them a lot of different ways. So a lot of what's out there is actually not very substantial if you look at it closely. Now, for example, it's claimed that the spiral, the golden mean ratio, determines the proportions of the body. For example, like a lot of people claim that the relationship between the length of the hand, the ratio between the length of the hand and the length of the arm, people maintain that that is in the golden mean ratio. However, if you measure it, you will find that the actual relationship in many cases is closer to the crystal spiral ratios. So what we have here is that people are familiar with a particular spiral, with the golden mean spiral, and with the golden mean ratio on which it's based. They look for that, and that's what they find. It's because it's what they're looking for. They're not familiar with other ratios or with other spirals, and so they don't find them. They're not looking for them. So in human anatomy, a lot of proportions are claimed to be golden mean when in fact they're not. So the ratio of hand to forearm, the ratio of the long finger to the palm, etc. It is claimed that all of the proportions in the body are based, or a lot of the proportions in the body are claimed on, are based on the golden mean ratio. But if you look closely at it and measure it, you'll find that they're not. So there's quite a bit of variability there. And also in architecture, there's a lot of focus on the use of, we'd say, these golden rectangles and the golden mean in, we'd say, architectural design, for example, in the construction of Greek temples. It's claimed that they use the golden mean ratio. However, if you look at the actual information, you will find that they're actually using a whole range of ratios. in some cases, they are using the golden mean ratio, but in our case, they're not. So, for example, somebody who has analyzed some of these ratios in Greek architecture has come up with the pattern that two sequences of numbers, 1, 2, 4, 8. So this is the crystal spiral sequence of numbers. And interestingly enough, we also have the 1, 3, 9, 27, 81. So we have the Merkaba expansion numbers. And it turns out that an awful lot of ratios are actually ratios between pairs of these numbers. They're not necessarily golden mean ratios, but they are other ratios between these two numbers. And in fact, this illustrates a very interesting point that these in ancient tradition recognized these two sequences of numbers, the number based on an expansion by 2 and the number sequence based on expansion by 3, and that there was close relationship between the two. Now, also it's claimed that the golden mean spiral is present in nature quite a bit, and again, that's a lot of, there's some cases where it is and a lot of cases where it isn't. And even where it is, like the relationship is often very approximate. It's claimed, for example, that this shell, what's referred to as the Nautilus shell, is often taken as a representation of the Fibonacci spiral. Now, if you look at that closely, if you take the Fibonacci spiral and overlay it on this spiral shell, it doesn't fit. But at the same time, this is often taken as a symbolic representation of the Fibonacci spiral. Now, just an interesting point. When I was here in FOL, for FOL, I spent the first night here in the Indigo Hotel here at the other side of the crossroads. And it was very interesting. It was a beautiful hotel and a very pleasant stay there. But it was very interesting to see that they were using an awful lot of symbolism of the Fibonacci material. The symbolism of the Fibonacci spiral. For example, they had they had a Fibonacci. They had a Phi restaurant. They had Fibonacci specials on the menu. And furthermore, the symbol for the hotel is actually this shell, this Nautilus shell, which is intended to represent the Fibonacci spiral. And there was a lot of Fibonacci spiral artwork on the walls. So what that is, and if you're going out by the hotel there, you can actually see the symbol up on the walls of the hotel. So what that is, to a certain extent, it's may very well be telling us is that some of that energy is present in the grids here. It's a representation, an external representation of some of what's in the grids here. Now, the crystal spiral, like these grids here are extremely powerful grids. They're probably the most powerful on the planet. And they, of course, embody the crystal spiral. Like that's heavily present here. But there is also an element of this, the Fibonacci spiral present. You can see it on the surface symbolism in the area. So it's probably the case that the conflict, as it were, between the Fibonacci spiral and the crystal spiral is probably particularly focused in this area. It may very well, the conflict is may very well be particularly focused here. I don't know the history, but it's conceivable that this could be one of the locations where the original distortions were propagated, and it's now where the circle is being closed and where the battle, as it were, between the spirals is coming to a particular focus. We'll say where we saw the two spirals coming together during the February to August period of next year, 2011. So it'd be interesting to get a little bit more background on some of the history of that development in this area. Now, we're just about done. You'll be glad to hear. So, just to summarize then, the crystallic structures, they support an open living universe, full higher dimensional connections and cosmic interconnections, direct connections through the center to source. They derive from the Christ code, which embodies the original intention for creation as expressed through the Katara grid, crystal spiral, and the subsequent structures. Now, the Metatronic structures, they can be traced to their origins in the crystallic structures, and they represent distortions from them. So it's interesting, Joe, to trace the correspondences all the way back. The metatronic structures lead to a severing of higher dimensional and source connections, and this in turn leads to an isolated, closed, and a dying universe. So that's what we're suffering from at the present time. The Crystal River host is key to averting the serious consequences of such distortions at this time. So there's the Battle of the Spirals underway, and so hopefully we'll come out on the, or well, not hopefully, we will come out on the right side of that battle. But also it's important to note that there are places in cosmos where science is sacred. And there has been a time on the planet when science was sacred. And so let us hope that we can come once more to a time and a place where science is once again sacred. Okay, thank you for your attention.